Welcome to the Spirit-Led Men at Work podcast, where I interview Christian men from all walks of life with varying job titles who have one thing in common. They are all choosing daily to be led by the Holy Spirit at their work. And because of that, they are leading, prospering, glorifying God, and experiencing joy and purpose in their work. And you can too. Men at Work, this is Dave Hilgendorf, and welcome to episode 7 of Spirit-Led Men at Work podcast. I'm excited to bring to you this interview today with Bill Fraine. Bill was born number 7 of 9 children to Lorraine and Frank Frain in Boston, Massachusetts. He joined FedEx in 1979 as a handler washing trucks and spent 20-plus years working from handler to senior vice president, reporting directly to Fred Smith, founder and CEO. He became CEO of Zoho, a .com, and over the years has held leadership positions with many top companies. Today, Bill has a family of 4 girls with his wife Dawn and lives in Gibsonville, North Carolina. He holds the position of Chief Operating Officer for XPO Logistics Supply Chain in High Point, North Carolina, where he leads a team of over 20,000 employees servicing Fortune 50 companies. Bill's life was changed at the age of 42 when in 2001 he came face to face with his Lord and Savior and gave his life over to Jesus. This interview is going to be a little unique because we're going to be splitting it into 2 separate episodes. The entire length of the interview was just under an hour and a half, and I just felt it made sense to split it in half in order to keep each episode a length that's consistent with our normal episodes. I think you'll agree that there was nothing in this interview that I could have taken out. It's excellent, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. So let's get right to the interview. Bill, thanks for joining us today. Normally my first question is when and how you became a Christian. I've heard you speak, and in your case, I feel like I'd be cheating our listeners if I didn't let you walk us through your testimony leading up to making Jesus your Lord, since it's such an interesting story. So start us out with your childhood growing up Catholic in Boston, followed by your career with FedEx, and culminating with a very interesting experience you and your wife had at a bar in Seaside, Florida.
Thank you, David. I grew up in Boston, and as I told you, as a kid in Boston, the first thing anybody would ask you is what parish you're from. And I grew up thinking everybody on the planet was Catholic. That's just how you perceive things. But I had my entire life revolved around the church. My mom and dad made sure that it was a very specific thing that they wanted in our lives. I had 8 brothers and sisters, and our Boy Scouts, Little League, Girl Scouts, Brownies, everything we did, my parents were involved in. They were both leaders, either in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, and my dad was a coach on the Little League team. But we were very involved. We had priests at our house, nuns at our house. It seemed like almost every other weekend. I have aunts and uncles who are nuns, and cousins who are priests. It was a great experience. It was a very normal thing. And I went to church every Sunday, and I loved church, and I loved worship, and I loved being part of a church. But what was interesting for me now when I look back is the Spirit never took a hold of me. I always understood what it was, but it was never something personal to me. And that doesn't mean that there aren't very strong Christians who are Catholics. My parents are a great example of that. My mom's a prayer warrior. But for me, it just didn't. With all that experience around me, it was very clear that you can be in church and you can be surrounded, but it won't take. There's something that has to happen in your life, or something there's a time that the Lord chooses to introduce himself. But so I went on from that and dropped out of church, and didn't continue. As I moved on, I joined FedEx at a very early age. I was 21. The company was $60 million, so it was tiny. Most of the conversations in the paper and news were whether Federal Express at the time would survive. It was a kind of shot in the dark kind of company. But as I got to know the company more and fell in love with it, I moved on with the company. So I moved from different jobs, from starting out washing trucks up through working for the founder of the company and being a senior exec at FedEx. And the company went from 60 million to almost 20 billion at the time I was there. And I lived all over the world with the company. I traveled all over the world. I lived in 8, 9 different places, moved my family. I had a family. I got married and had a family. But again, I had no really outside of work. I had no need in my mind for it, but I also had no direction, no faith direction in my life. And I wasn't a bad person. I would say every one of my friends would say, and everyone who worked for me would say I was a good guy, sometimes a great guy to work for. But there was no grounding. I wasn't, for example, I got divorced through my work, and it wasn't the work's fault. It was my fault. But I didn't balance things. I was always open to new jobs and new areas. I took my wife and my kids on a lot of different things that maybe we didn't discuss or didn't talk about. It was always about the job. And when I got there, I didn't focus on family. I focused on the work. And when we moved to London, that was probably the final straw for my wife. It was, I got there, I was invested in people immediately because I was working. It was a struggle for her to meet people. My daughters struggled a little bit. They were 5 and 6 at the time. And I know that all now, but I wasn't really paying attention to it then. It was kind of, hey, suck it up and we're here to do a job. And so, we lost ourselves over that, and I wasn't really paying attention to it. It wasn't the heartbreak it should have been for me. It was tough. I obviously stayed very close to my daughters and spent, every weekend with them. But it was a different challenge. But again, because I didn't have a lot of faith in my life, I didn't recognize that as a problem. It just seemed like, hey, people get divorced, families break up. And time went on, and I met my wife now after about 3 years. I met my wife now, Dawn, and Dawn didn't have any real faith in her life either. She had grown up in a home that didn't practice. They went to church occasionally, but the main holidays, but didn't have a lot of practice in faith. And so she didn't. So we met. Our lives were fairly normal. We had a great time with friends, and we took care of our daughters. And she came to love my daughters, and my ex-wife came to love Dawn because Dawn, she said, how could you not love someone who treats your kids the way Dawn does? And so life went on. Everything was great. And we always had plans at some point that we'd try to have a family together. That was a big plan. But I was probably putting it off more than Dawn was because of my daughters, because I knew that would be something that they would feel a little lacking on. We had new children who were living with Dad and Dawn, and they didn't have that. So, but there came a time when we decided to do that. First, we got married, obviously, and decided to have children. And so we started working at it, and nothing happened. And we went through in vitro, and nothing happened. And then finally, Dawn got pregnant. It was such a great time, and we were very excited. And right as the baby was about to be born, the doctors told us that the baby would be born, but the baby wouldn't survive long. And so that was tough. I remember driving to the hospital to have Dawn give birth. And I talked to the Lord in the car. I just said, Lord, I can never fix this. I can fix most things for Dawn. I don't know how to fix this for her. Please let this not be, the thing that breaks our lives. And so we went through that, and we had a beautiful baby girl, and she survived a short time. And tougher than that was Dawn learned right after that, or as tough as that, was that we couldn't have children. Dawn couldn't have children. And so that was, for my wife, a huge blow. Dawn's very, very determined person, very smart, very always able to overcome anything, and a very sweet person. But this was something that she just, in her life, she thought, okay, I'll get married, I'll have a job, I'll do these things, and then I'll have a baby. And this one thing couldn't happen now. And so Dawn started searching, and I knew none of this. I was me. So I just became a CEO of a company on the West Coast, a .com. I spent a lot of time in the company. We were just growing it. We had to get, we had raised capital. We had to get companies on board. If you understood how .coms were, you had to have a lot of things happen in 6 to 8 months to make it to a IPO, a public offering. So that was my life. For 6 months, we moved out to California. I still kept the home in Memphis, and we came back every weekend and saw my daughters. But we moved out to California, and I was full on the job, and Dawn was alone at home. Had no friends out there, didn't know anybody. But she was searching and trying to figure out what was, going through her life, and frankly going through some depression that I didn't recognize. But my ex-wife did, of course. And the things that Roberta had been telling Dawn about over the years, witnessing to her and giving her books, all of a sudden stuck with Dawn. And Dawn, instead of not being interested, was very interested. Started to read and learn and talk and pray. And excuse me. And at one point, she read the prayer of Jabez and came away with a hunger to know Jesus. She understood the prayer and understood the book and believed that Jesus would reveal himself to her if she really seeked him with all her heart. And so she did, and she said the prayer. She somewhere in the book, or she got it in her head, that if she said the prayer for 30 days, at that point the Lord would reveal, not as a trick, but just more her searching, just like fasting or anything else. And she didn't really understand this, but you have to know Dawn, if she commits to something, she's committed. Her heart's in it. And she truly wanted to know the Lord. She felt that was the only thing that would complete her life. And again, I knew none of this. So we decided to take a trip. Dawn was struggling a bit, and I did recognize that. And so we went back to a place we always loved called Seaside, Florida. We had our older daughters were older. They were 18 and 17 or somewhere in that range. And we rented a house down there, and one night, it was like one of the last nights we were there, there's a little restaurant with a bar above called Bud and Alley's. And we went there, and then the girls went back to the house with their friends. They were, watching a movie, and Dawn and I went out for a few drinks at the bar. And it's just a beautiful setting, sitting upstairs. And it was late. It was probably 11 o'clock, between 11 and 12. And I just remember because the place was pretty empty. There was myself and Dawn sitting at the bar, and it was a pretty night. And Blake was a bartender, and there was probably maybe one other person. And Dawn got up for a minute to go to the ladies' room, which you had to go downstairs. It's outside of the little tiki bar we were in. And what I didn't know is she actually had remembered to say her prayer for the 30th day. She forgot to. And so Dawn went outside to say her prayer. And while she was gone, this young lady came in and sat down next to me. And I didn't know her. She was a cute girl. She was blonde. And she started trying to talk to me. And I said, look, my wife was sitting there, but I'll move over one. And I left because I didn't want Dawn to walk in and see me talking to a girl. And so Dawn came back and sat down between us, and the girl immediately started talking to Dawn. It wasn't like a pause. She just turned to Dawn and started talking. And, that was fine. Dawn was talking back to her, and I was talking to Blake, who's a bartender, and I could start to hear the word Jesus a lot. There's something about, so I knew she was talking about that. I thought it was a little strange at 11, 12 o'clock at night in a bar. But again, didn't really give it a lot of thought. And, Dawn was entertained or seemed like she was interested. And Blake even said to me at one point, this went on about 20 minutes. He said, you want me to stop this girl and tell her to get out of here? She seems like she's, bugging Dawn. And I said, no, Dawn seems fine. Let her, Dawn's a big girl. Let her talk. And should we now call her Patty the Angel? So we get up to leave, probably another 30 minutes. So, closer to midnight or after. We got up to leave, and we started walking out, and Patty followed us out and walked down the bottom of the stairs with us. And her and Dawn were in this deep conversation, and I could see Dawn was engaged as much as Patty was. And continued to go on. So I stood there for a while, and I'm not a patient person. I get learning, but not a patient person. So I listened for a while on the conversation. And finally, I kind of stuck in and said, okay, that's great, Patty. Great meeting you. This is wonderful. And, I'm Catholic. I get all this, but we got to go. We really have to leave. And she didn't really answer me, and Dawn and her kept talking and kept going on. And so I waited a few more minutes. Then I stepped in again and just said, okay, hey, this is really wonderful. I need to go. And finally, the third time, I was a little more deliberate and just said, look, this is great. Got to go. And Patty turned to me at that point and said, Bill, isn't there anything you worry about? And I said, yes, I have 2 daughters. They're back at the house with their friends, and Dawn and I need to go back there. She just said, well, you need to read Psalm 91, and then turned and talked to Dawn. So probably about another 30 minutes, we finally broke it up. And Patty was saying some pretty cool stuff. I remember a lot of it now. Wasn't paying attention to it then. I remember Dawn asking her, so who's Jesus? And Patty said, well, Jesus is love. And she just went into a whole conversation about Jesus, just, something that then was just more boring to me. Now it was amazing to me when I think of some of the things she was saying and how my life's changed. But so when we left there, we started walking back. Patty drove away, and we walked to the house. It was probably about a 10-minute walk. And Dawn told me the whole story. Now she told me about searching for the Lord. I knew none of this. Told me about reading the books and talking to Roberta and reading the stuff that Roberta had given her and really searching. And the things that you have to know, again, Dawn is very, very deliberate. So she did a detailed analysis with notes and diagrams. This is how Dawn is. And then she told me about prayer of Jabez in 30 days. And the Lord, praying for the Lord to come to her and reveal himself to her. And she told me that she went downstairs that night to say the prayer for the 30th time. And when she came back in, this young girl was sitting next to her. And she turned to her and she said, "Look, you don't know me. My name's Patty. I don't go to bars and I don't drink." She said, "But I was driving by here and the Lord just put it in my heart. I had to come in here. There was someone he wanted me to talk to." And I always choke up when I make that comment because it just amazes me how the Lord is that he did that, that he made that conversation. But so Dawn told me this and I'm listening and I believe everything Dawn tells me. She's the one person who can always get through to me. She's very, like I said, very thoughtful person, and I trust her, everything she says. And I know how deliberate she is. So she doesn't take, Dawn's not an exaggerator. She doesn't tell wild stories. She's just very deliberate. And so, it was a strange conversation. It was pretty deep, and I could tell that Dawn was different. Dawn was done. I mean, she knew the Lord. She was sold. It was over. And I didn't even know how much then. I just realized something was different, that, she just couldn't stop. And so we talked for a while. The girls went to bed. We sat up and talked, and then we went upstairs to bed. And as I was getting in bed, of course, there was a Bible next to my side of to the bed. I don't remember it being there. I'm not saying it was or it wasn't. I just never saw it. It wasn't something I had in my vision. I was thinking about. And I opened it up and I read Psalm 91, and I got to he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will abide under the shadow of the Almighty. He will say of the Lord, my rock, my fortress, my God in whom I trust. His truth will be my shield and buckler. And I just knew. I knew who Jesus was. It wasn't a question mark. I hadn't knelt down and said the prayer of salvation. I hadn't asked Jesus into my heart. I just knew instantly who Jesus was. I knew he was the Lord of all. I knew he was everything. It amazes me still today when I think back on it, but I just knew there was not a question. And this person who I'd known all my life as a child and in the church, who was somebody up in heaven, was now here with me. He was real to me. He was completely real to me. And I couldn't get enough of the Bible. I just could. I read most of the Psalms that night. I think I probably went to bed at about 4 or 5 in the morning. And I read Daniel. I remember the thing that stuck with me the most. I read a lot of Daniel, and I got it. It was the biggest part of reading the Bible then was it all talked to me. As it says in the Bible, the Spirit reveals to your heart. It all talked to me. I understood what I was reading. It all made sense. There wasn't a doubt. It wasn't a story off in the distance. It was something real. And I remember Daniel was on his face for 40 days praying for the nation of Israel because it had been revealed to him what would happen to the nation. And the angel showed up, and he said the normal opening for the angel, "Do not be afraid," but he said also that I was held up by the prince of Babylon, and Michael had to come and fight to get me out. But the point he said to Daniel, I always remember, was from the moment you began praying, the Lord sent out word. And that's always stuck with me in my life because I always remember that there are times in my life since then where it's the Lord is just not anywhere near me. And I'm praying about something with all my heart and looking for it. And I don't feel him and I don't see him, and time goes by, some cases years. And then when the answer happens, I can see exactly how every single step of the way had to be that way for me to have that answer. And nothing could have got put together that way had the Lord not been in it. And what a miracle it is. And that's something that, remembering that it's a big part of my life now, that I always understand that the Lord's going to show up. I don't know where and when, but I don't have to worry about it. And I know he's going to be there. So that's the story of my salvation. I always call it a ricochet because it was Dawn searching. He was blessed enough to put us both together. He showed grace. At the same time, a married couple found the Lord the same day. And Dawn the next morning just looked at me and said, "How could we have been so blind?" And it's so great to not be blind anymore.
I love that story. One of my thoughts that comes to mind is how much I want to be a Patty, because I've heard stories like that where someone without any doubt is led to do something like that. And that is, to me, that is such a faith builder to hear a story like that. So thanks for sharing that. I wanted to focus a little bit on your career and how your faith has intersected with your career. So tell us a little bit about how some of your financial circumstances changed, and then kind of how that led to what you're doing right now.
Well, it's and I do want to say something quick on Patty so I don't forget. Patty was down in Florida because her husband had told her he wanted a divorce after a lot of years, and she was there with a friend who had asked her to come down to comfort her. And so the night Patty pulled in was one of the worst times in her life, but she still heard the Lord and came in. I always want to remind people of that this wasn't a woman driving around looking for something to do. This was a woman in dire despair who took the time out of her day to be obedient to the Lord and come and speak to us. So that's just always amazing to me. But, the biggest change for me has been, I was 43 when I was saved. I told you this before, but I worked at FedEx, and out of all the executives there, most of them, except maybe two, I was one of them, were Christians, and not just Christians, but prayed about everything. I mean, I thought these people were crazy. They prayed about everything. They prayed at lunch. They prayed at dinner. They prayed for business plans. I remember making jokes about, hey, guys, I'm going to go make my plan. You guys keep praying. And when you look at that, you think of the success of FedEx. It's not a big surprise. It's not a big surprise at all. And these people are just unbelievable, great friends of mine. And when I was saved, the first thing I did in my business life was called every single one of them and told them that I was saved. And it was a big day for them because they were pretty funny about it. But they said, man, we've been praying for you for a long time. You were kind of on the not sure if it's going to happen list. But it was a big for them because it showed the grace of God, that what had happened to Dawn and I. They loved Dawn and I. They were great friends of ours before, and now they're brothers and sisters with us, and it's such an amazing thing. But I will tell you, the thing that I realized when I was saved was I never lived my life like they did. A couple of things that, I'm always been a good guy to work with. I'm always big on human dignity and respect. I believe that people deserve that at work. Most of my family growing up are blue-collar guys, men and women, my mom and dad, a lot of my brothers. So when I look at my employees, I see my family. So I've always had a heart to take care of people. I understood the struggle. I'm a kid with a high school diploma who was able to work up and, end up working for the founder of FedEx. So I understand what it takes to get there. And I always appreciate employees because I know what their dreams are. I know what my dreams were. I know what my struggles were. I know how hard it was to make the money I made when I had my first two daughters and run a house and with my wife and have a job and on and on. So the difference after I was saved was I understood my role. It wasn't just to be a boss. It wasn't just to be a good guy. And it wasn't, and the hard part, because I was a senior exec, it wasn't that I couldn't be a minister and a witness. Because it doesn't matter what company you're in, you're going to put a lightning rod on your back if you start preaching the Lord in business, because that's today's world. But it doesn't mean you can't show the Lord in business. And that was the biggest thing to me, was my world changed because I pray for everything. It's what I said about Daniel. I pray for everything because I know the minute I pray, the Lord sends out word. I pray for my business plans. I pray for my team. I pray for the success. I pray for new accounts. I pray for the leadership of the company. I pray for the leadership of the country. I pray for all the things, the banks, all the things that impact my business. I pray to because I know the Lord's going to be in those and He's going to guide those, whether they know it or not. And so that's been a big change to me and that's where Dawn's become a rock for me, because that's what we do at night. She'll ask me every night, what went on today? What are you worried about? What's working? And we'll talk about the people and the individuals and some of the crisis. And Dawn will pray about them. I'll stop in the middle of the day and call Dawn on the phone and tell her something, and she'll pray with me. And I stop and pray. I always have my Bible with me. I stop and pray. And everybody who knows me knows I'm a Christian. They know who I am. I don't ever hide that. I also don't make it something they need to be concerned about. They all know that I'm fair. They all know that I listen. And the ones who know me well enough know that me being a Christian is a good thing, which is important. And I mean a good thing meaning I do have a set of values and beliefs, and I can't be a hypocrite to those if I really am a Christian. And that's the other thing I'd say is I've realized how important my role is to the Lord in the company. And so before, I was a guy who drank and partied, and I still drink, but I understand my role in the Lord. I understand when I'm with a group of employees, when I'm at a dinner, I understand my role is not what I might have let it be in the past, where I might have been the guy up latest having a good time. I know that's not my role. I know my role is to be his person, his ambassador to this group. And He'll use me. And there are times I've had every company I've worked at since I've been saved. We always kid about it. I have a group of people that are saved from my relationship with them. And it's never because I go out overtly and witness to them. It's never that. one gentleman I know really well. He's a great man of God. His whole thing was to argue with me. His whole thing was every time he saw me was to bring up how stupid it was to be a Christian. And I never took the bait. I never, on purpose, I would just say, look, our thinking is far apart. I love you. You're a great guy, but there's nothing you're going to do that's going to tell me something that I'm going to go, oh my goodness, you're right. I was wrong. And there may be nothing I'm going to tell you, and I'm not going to ever force my faith on you. All I'm going to tell you is you ask me what makes me be the way I am. What was the first conversation we had? And I told you it's the peace that Jesus gives me and the grace that he puts on me. That's what started our whole conversation. And you've been determined to break that down. And it's not going to happen, and it's fine, and I'm still going to love you, and we're still going to be buddies, and we're still going to work together. And so it was, and he and I became great buddies, and he was a very mercurial guy. You had to be around him, a founder of a company that I joined. And what happened was one day, as the Lord always does, one day he got in a situation where he was being pushed aside. And even though he founded the company, the board had come in, the investor had come in, he had been there a couple of years running it, and they felt that he wasn't the right guy to run it. And he called me and he asked me if I'd come out and meet him in his car. I knew something was up because that wasn't what he normally asked me. And I got out in the car and he said he was shaking. And I just said, what's up? And he told me, and I said, listen, you can't, your life is not about this. I said, this is what I keep trying to tell you. Your life has so much more purpose than this job and this company. I said, you can't make this about you. It's not. I said, I understand. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be upset. Doesn't mean you should be mad. But your purpose is not here. God created you for so much more than this. And we just talked, and I witnessed to him, and I went through different Psalms with him in the car, and we read the Bible together, and we talked. And through that, he got peace. I won't say he was saved yet, but he gained peace. He started to understand and listen. And that's what I said. I said, look, there's no way I would get through the things I go through every day here or any place if I didn't have the Lord on my side. There's too much going on. This was during 2008. This is when the economy was crashing. So there's too much going on that would scare me and break me apart. I said, but I'm at peace every day. And the reason I'm at peace every day is because I know that the Lord has a purpose for me and a place for me, and he's in everything I do. And no weapon formed against me shall prosper. And I said, and that's what you have to come to the realization of. I said, look, there's nothing else I can tell you to make you feel good, because everything else is not the truth. The truth is that you were formed by a loving God. You were given breath by a loving God, and he will be with you if you want him to be. And that's what your purpose in life is. And after that, everything else will be normal. And so, over a period of time, the next 6 months, he came back and he's saved and he loves the Lord. And now his business and his life is all about spreading the Lord's word, no matter what he does. And he understands everything I just said. He knows it's all a fact. And I could go over story after story after story, company after company, but it's always been where I never state anything to anybody. I never go in and say, hey, let me tell you about Jesus. What I always pray every morning is, Lord, bring me the people you want me to talk to. Because I can talk to people if they come to me. That's how I view it. Now, the company may think differently, but if somebody comes to me and asks me about my faith or my Lord, I can talk about it all day long. I'm doing nothing outside of the rules. If I go out and bring it up, if I say a prayer at a meeting, if I go in and say, let's pray about this, then for a lot of people in the room, they're going to be offended. And listen, they're of different faiths. They're of different races. So I understand. I wouldn't be pumped if somebody of another faith came and wanted me to pray in their faith. I wouldn't be interested. So I'm not saying that I just know that my way is the way that is the one true God. But as the leader, I have to be careful because there are people who will use that. Right? There's a whole thing going on right now in North Carolina, and it's because there's some people trying to push some laws in the country that are to their favor, not necessarily the state's favor. So we just have to, we have to be careful of that, but it doesn't mean we can't be the Lord's ambassador in everything we do.
That sounds good. And I guess, we're all in different circumstances. And you have a responsibility for a lot of people, so it's interesting to get your perspective on that. You did share, when I heard you talk recently, about where you went through a difficult time. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. And I think it started with someone had made a comment to you, well, it's easy for you to be a Christian because you're rich, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the, as I always go back to the Bible where it says, Jesus had no power in his own hometown because they didn't believe. And I had that with my family. So I was saved, and man, I had a cure for cancer. I was telling everybody. I went to my brothers and sisters. I remember sending them all an email, calling them all, and even my mom and dad, because my mom and dad are Catholics, and so they were like, they thought I left the church. I mean, they thought I went to the other side. I was like, Mom, this is about as close to a priest as you're ever going to get. Yeah. She always wanted a priest in the family, but the. So yeah, my sister Lori, who I love, she was the one we were talking about at one time, and she was asking questions. I find when I sit back and don't bring it up, more people ask me about it. Right? They want to know why I'm so crazy. And she brought it up. We remember in a pool one day in down in Florida, and her and her husband were there, Bob. And Bob grew up actually Baptist, and my family had him convert to Catholicism because he had to be Catholic to marry my sister. But we were just talking. Bob and I started talking, and Bob was interested in my conversion and my finding the Lord. And it resonated with Bob because Bob grew up Baptist and he understood this. And it was the first time anybody in my family talked the way I was talking. So I could tell he got it and he liked it. And then Laurie, who's, we all have a smart wit. She just said, well, Bill, it's easy for you to be Christian because you're rich. And I had a good job at the time. And it stuck with me because I remember thinking that, and I wondered, okay, Lord, is that something? Have I never gone through trials? Have I never been Paul, getting stoned for your name? I mean, it really struck me. And I know he loved me and I know I was willing to do anything for him, but it got me thinking and wondering. And my prayer all the time was always, because I was 43 when I was saved and because I'd missed out on so much of him, I was so not frustrated with myself, but realized I had friends who were who found the Lord, knew the Lord at 5 years old. I mean, heck, I was like, man, you had so many more bonus years than I ever had. So I didn't want to miss anything. I wanted to sell out for the Lord in everything. I wanted to be his man over the top. If there were special forces in the Lord's world, I wanted to be that. So my prayer was always, Lord, let there be no distance between us. Let there be nothing that you won't bring me to. I remember it was Elisa who said, I want a double helping of his spirit. That's kind of what I was thinking in my head is I wanted more than anybody else had, not for jealous reasons. I wanted to make up for all the time I didn't have anything. And so I would pray that prayer. And then I went about, I had already left FedEx. The .com world had collapsed. I was doing other jobs and they were great. And I was able to witness, like I said, one of my best friends in life now, I met him right after 9/11. Literally, I met him right before 9/11, but we first really talked right after 9/11. Literally, right after 9/11, I was in San Francisco. I woke up, a friend of mine called me, and I saw 9/11 happening on the TV, and Paul was in the room next to me, and he knew I was a Christian. We talked about it. He wasn't, and he knocked on my door, and he goes, "Man," and he goes, "Bill, I can't get on a plane." He lived in Washington D.C. I lived in Memphis, and I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Bill, I'm going to die. I can't get on a plane." I said, "Well, first of all, Paul, there are no planes. Nothing's flying today." So we got in a car and we drove back to, I drove to Memphis, then he stayed over, then he drove back to D.C. because remember, for a couple of days, there were no planes. And so we talked in the car all the way back. And he kept saying, "Listen, I don't know what I'm going to do. My whole life is flying on planes." See, that's what he did for a living. He went around, and that's what I did too. We managed all these accounts. And I said, "Paul," I said, "listen to me. If the Lord wants to take you, you'll be standing at a urinal. Don't worry about it. You don't need to get on a plane. He doesn't need to invent airplanes for you to get in the sky to take you out." I said, "That's not the issue." And he said, "Oh, I don't know." So I said, "Okay." Then we talked. I told him my salvation story. I told him about the prayer of Jabez, and so I just finished telling him the story. And I could tell Paul's a very smart guy, and those are sometimes the most complicated people to talk to about the Lord. Very smart guy. And he rationalizes everything, and he always wants to build a chart and a graph around what I'm talking about. And but he went home that night. He went home the next day, and when he drove in, his wife and he had never talked about it, never had a conversation about it, never spent a lot of time in faith. He walked in, his wife was sitting on the bed reading the prayer of Jabez, and he called me and he goes, "All right, I get it. Someone's trying to talk to me." So since then, Paul's become on fire, and Paul flies everywhere. He's not afraid of anything, and he's just an amazing man of God. And so it's. For me, after that job, actually, we decided to, we adopted our daughters. That's a whole nother story, but we adopted two beautiful little babies. They were 2 weeks old. And what Dawn had asked me in my life was at some point, and I always said, okay, honey, at some point I would take time off and we just enjoy life, because I was no different at work. I was still 100 miles an hour. I had big jobs and made good money, but it was I was always never wanting to not achieve the job, so I was always doing whatever it took. And so when we adopted the babies, we agreed that I would take time off. So I left the working world. We've got a restaurant down on the beach in Seaside where we were saved, and spent about 5 years there with the girls and had a great time. And I was buying and selling homes. If you remember that area, that time, this was right before up from like 2003 to 2007. And so there were years in there where we couldn't do any wrong. I mean, everything we bought made money. Everything we did made money. Everything we built was sold, and it was fantastic. So we were investing more and more and more and building bigger and bigger and really well vested into this, almost everything we had, which was considerable. And then 2007 happened. If anybody knows Florida in 2007, if you don't, put it in Google. That's when the economy started to collapse. And it all started around Florida. If you saw the movie, if you haven't seen it, go see The Short Game. It's pretty interesting, but it's all about that topic. And so the entire economy collapsed, especially the real estate economy, especially Florida. So Florida was ground zero. So we lost everything. I mean, we went from having whatever we wanted to having nothing. And it wasn't terrible. I was working, so we had nothing, but we went from having whatever we wanted to, living on a $30,000, $40,000 a year salary, which most people do every single day. We just weren't used to it. We had a lot of expenses. We had homes. We had cars. We had, we weren't planning on that train ending, and so we tried to collapse back as quick as we could, but literally in weeks and months, housing loans were called. Everything we had was called. So we tried to pay every bill. The money we had, we paid every bill. We didn't declare bankruptcy again, being Christian. We couldn't just take, the lawyer had said, oh, Bill, what you need to do is shut everything off right now. Keep all your money. And I was like, I can't do that. I owe people money. I made commitments to people. So until we ran out of cash, we paid every single bill and every single amount that we needed to, and had really nothing left. Pretty much about $5,000, I think, in the bank left. Every credit card gone. We had to get rid of all those. Get rid of every house. Get rid of every car. I was driving a beat up old pickup, and so we had really no place to go. We went down to my mom's house, my mother-in-law's house, in like 2008, I think it was, beginning of 2008, and moved in down there with her, which really wasn't my plan ever. My mother-in-law's a saint. She took us in. She's a sweet woman. She took us in and took care of us for all that time. I got a cheap job. I got a job down there. I think I was making like $500 a week. And then that was the interesting thing for me, was it wasn't that I wasn't trying, but I couldn't get hired at anything. Now, this was a tough time. It was a tough economy, but I was applying anywhere and everywhere. I was calling every headhunter I knew, and I was always a pretty hot commodity if I wanted to get a job. People were usually calling me as how I got jobs. I couldn't get a job anywhere. I mean, and I'm not picking on jobs, but I went and applied at a 7-Eleven store. I went and applied at a Firestone tire store, and those were all worthwhile jobs. I couldn't get any of them. I mean, I got nothing, and it got to the point where it just didn't make any sense, and I couldn't understand it. And my prayers were, I was reading the Psalms. I was completely understanding what David was talking about. When he was crying out to the Lord, "Why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me here? What have I done? Please, my enemies are laughing at me and saying there is no God to protect me." I remember all those things, and it was funny. It was something I realized in me. It was a big part for me. It was an embarrassment, because I was always Bill Fraine, Senior Vice President at FedEx, youngest director, youngest VP, youngest Senior VP. I was always this up-and-coming charger. And even though I'd left there, almost 8-9 years ago at this point, it was still who I was. That was probably one of the first things I said about myself. I'm Bill Fraine. I worked at FedEx. I spent 23 years there, worked for the founder. It was always an opening thing. And I realized it wasn't that anymore. More importantly, I realized that was going to come out. I realized anybody who knew me was going to say, "Hey, what's Bill Fraine doing?" And somebody's going to say, "Living with his mother-in-law in Florida." And I was like, whoa. So that was I realized how much pride I had, is my point. I realized how I knew it was the Lord. I knew it was his favor, but I was kind of hung up on it too. My sister's words came back in my head. And then my mother-in-law, very sweet lady, but she came to us and just said, look, there's been enough time here. We were there about a year and a half. And nothing. I wasn't finding any jobs. I could find nothing. And I think she probably felt I was being lazy. I really wasn't. But I was praying about it. I was shouting at the Lord at this point, taking walks every day, going for any job I could get. And again, 2020 vision, looking backwards, I can understand what he did. I wasn't done in the test. I wasn't over it. So my brother Mike lived in Naples, Florida. We drove across there. It's funny the way the Lord set it up, but Mike and I got together about 2 weeks before that. I loved Mike, but I just hadn't spent any time around him in a while. And I went over to visit with him. He called me and asked me to come over, and he's there by himself. And he kept talking about, why don't you stay longer? Why don't you stay over? Bill, you can stay out here as long as you want. And I was like, Mike, we're good. We're at Dawn's mom's. And I went back, and it was the day she said, you ain't going to be here anymore. We had to get a time to get out. And so we called Mike. Mike said, sure. So, that's all the Lord again. But I went over to live with Mike, and Dawn and I and the girls stayed there. My wife, I got to say this too. Dawn, my wife, who went from being, this amazing girl, amazing wife, Dawn's never been a big person about money, but had everything she wanted to, houses cleaned and hair done and anything she wanted to. Never said a word to me, never did nothing but love me and pray with me and love on me all the time. I had no job. I was living with her mother in her mother's house, eating her mother's food. Just never looked at me once like, I can't believe you did this to us. Because that's how I felt. So, I was over there with my brother, and Dawn was here again and taking care of the kids and homeschooling our girls. We just started homeschooling. And I was walking up and down these streets. This was in, again, Florida, Naples, walking up and down these streets, praying to the Lord with my hands up. He lived on like a 2-mile street, and I'd walk up and down the street every day just praying, saying, Lord, what are you doing with me? I know you love me. I know I have skills. I know you've given them to me. Why am I not able to use these? What is it you want? I have 2. This time they were like 4-year-old twins. Oh yeah, I think 4-year-old twins. I said, what am I going to do here? I'm a 50-year-old guy with no work, no hope, no future. And I have 5-year-old daughters you've given to me. I know you love me. What do you want me to do? Tell me. I'll sweep streets. I'll do whatever I want, but I need a job.
Men at Work. This is Dave Hilgendorf. As I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, we are splitting this interview up into 2 separate episodes just due to the length of it. So I'm going to stop here at the very midpoint of the interview. It's a little bit in the middle of a thought, but hopefully it's a bit of a cliffhanger too. As we return with the next episode, we'll continue with Bill telling us what God's response was as he prayed to him during this critical time of his life. I'm sure you've enjoyed this interview up to this point as much as I have. We've been talking to Bill Frain about his journey being Spirit-led at his work, and each of our journeys are unique, but hopefully you've heard something in this episode to inspire you and give direction for your own personal daily work life. You can find links and other info from this show at spiritledmen.com/007. Until next time, have a great day and God bless.